Ezekiel 46, beginning in verse 1. It says, Thus saith the Lord God, The gate of the inner court that looketh toward the east shall be shut the 6 working days. But on the Sabbath it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon it shall be opened. And the prince shall enter by the way of the porch of that gate without, and shall stand by the post of the gate. And the priest shall prepare his burnt offering and his peace offerings, and he shall worship at the threshold of the gate. Then he shall go forth, but the gate shall not be shut until the evening. Likewise, the people of the land shall worship at the door of this gate before the Lord in the Sabbaths and in the new moons. And the burnt offering that the prince shall offer unto the Lord in the Sabbath day shall be 6 lambs without blemish, and a ram without blemish. And the meat offering shall be an ephah for a ram, and the meat offering for the lambs as he shall be able to give, and an hin of oil to an ephah. And in that day of the new moon it shall be a young bullock without blemish, and 6 lambs and a ram, they shall be without blemish. And he shall prepare a meat offering, and an ephah for a bullock, and an ephah for a ram, and for the lambs according as his hand shall attain unto, and an hin of oil to an ephah. And when the prince shall enter, he shall go in by the way of the porch of that gate, and he shall go forth by the way thereof. But when the people of the land shall come before the Lord in the solemn feasts, he that entereth in by the way of the north gate to worship shall go out by the way of the south gate. And he that entereth by the way of the south gate shall go forth by the way of the north gate. He shall not return by the way of the gate whereby he came in, but shall go forth over against it. And the prince in the midst of them, when they go in, shall go in, and when they go forth, shall go forth. And in the feasts and in the solemnities, the meat offering shall be an ephah to a bullock, and an ephah to a ram, and to the lambs as he is able to give, and an hin of oil to an ephah. Now when the prince shall prepare a voluntary burnt offering or peace offerings voluntarily unto the Lord, one shall then open him the gate that looketh toward the east, and he shall prepare his burnt offering and his peace offerings, as he did on the Sabbath day. Then he shall go forth, and after his going forth one shall shut the gate. Thou shalt daily prepare a burnt offering unto the Lord of a lamb of the first year, without blemish. Thou shalt prepare it every morning. And thou shalt prepare a meat offering for it every morning, the 6th part of an ephah, and the 3rd part of an hin of oil, to temper with the fine flour, a meat offering continually by a perpetual ordinance unto the Lord. Thus shall they prepare the lamb, and the meat offering, and the oil, every morning for a continual burnt offering. Thus saith the Lord God, If the prince give a gift unto any of his sons, the inheritance thereof shall be his sons. It shall be their possession by inheritance. But if he give a gift of his inheritance to one of his servants, then it shall be his to the year of liberty. After it shall return to the prince, but his inheritance shall be his sons for them. Moreover, the prince shall not take of the people's inheritance by oppression to thrust them out of their possession, but he shall give his son's inheritance out of his own possession, that my people be not scattered every man from his possession. After he brought me through the entry which was at the side of the gate into the holy chambers of the priests, which looked toward the north, and behold, there was a place on the 2 sides westward. Then he said unto me, This is the place where the priests shall boil the trespass offering and the sin offering, where they shall bake the meat offering, that they bear them not out into the utter court to sanctify the people. Then he brought me forth into the utter court, and caused me to pass by the 4 corners of the court, and behold, in every corner of the court there was a court. In the 4 corners of the court there were courts joined of 40 cubits long and 30 broad. These 4 corners were of one measure. And there was a row of building round about them 4, and it was made with boiling places under the rows round about. Then said he unto me, These are the places of them that boil, where the ministers of the house shall boil the sacrifice of the people. So, last week we were reading about chapter 45, and we saw that dealt a lot with the duties and the inheritance of the priests and also of the prince. Chapter 46 focuses more on the responsibilities and duties of the prince in the millennial temple. And so, back in verse 1, it says, Thus saith the Lord God, The gate of the inner court that looketh toward the east shall be shut the 6 working days, but on the Sabbath it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon it shall be opened. And so this is at the eastern gate. Now this is not the eastern gate of the outer court, of the outer portion of the complex. This is the inner court gate. And so remember, there's the temple complex, there's the outer court, and then there's the inner court. Both the outer court and the inner court have 3 gates. Okay, they have one on the north, one on the south, and one in the east. So in chapter 44, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Then he brought me back the way of the outward sanctuary, which looketh toward the east, and it was shut. Then said the Lord unto me, This gate shall be shut, it shall not be opened, and no man shall enter in by it, because the Lord, the God of Israel, hath entered in by it, therefore it shall be shut." So the outer gate on the east will be shut. The inner gate will be shut 6 days out of the week, and will be opened on the Sabbath and also on the day of the new moon. So these are not the same gate, but if you look from the temple door and you face straight opposite away from the temple, imagine the temple's right behind me and I'm facing straight this way. The eastern gate is there, and then you could see through it when it's open across the outer court to see the gate that's permanently shut on the eastern side. And then the south would be to my right, and the north would be to my left. So it says in verse 2, "And the prince shall enter by the way of the porch of that gate without, and shall stand by the post of that gate, and the priests shall prepare his burnt offerings and his peace offerings, and he shall worship at the threshold of the gate. Then he shall go forth, but the gate shall not be shut until the evening. Likewise, the people of the land shall worship at the door of this gate before the Lord in the Sabbaths and in the new moons." And so on special days, the day of Sabbath, and also if it's a day of the new moon, so that'd be once a month, there will be special times where people will be able to come to this gate and worship there, whereas normally they would have to use the northern gate and the southern gate. It says in verse 4, "And the burnt offering that the prince shall offer unto the Lord in the Sabbath day shall be 6 lambs without blemish, and a ram without blemish. And the meat offering shall be an ephah for a ram, and the meat offering for the lambs as he shall be able to give, and an hin of oil to an ephah." And so there will be, a very repetitive cycle. It will be a ritualistic cycle that they will go through every Sabbath day and every new moon. They're going to have to prepare so much lambs, they're going to have to prepare a ram, they're going to have to prepare so much flour or meal, and they're going to have to prepare so much oil for these burnt offerings and meat offerings. It says in verse 6, "And in the day of the new moon it shall be a young bullock without blemish, and 6 lambs, and a ram, they shall be without blemish." And so now the day of the new moon actually has an addition. It's the same, except the addition of the young bullock. And so you have lambs, a ram, and a young bullock or a young cow. It says, "And he shall prepare a meat offering, an ephah for a bullock, and an ephah for a ram, and for the lambs according as his hand shall attain unto, and an hin of oil to an ephah. And when the prince shall enter, he shall go in by the way of the porch of that gate, and he shall go forth by the way thereof." And so when he comes in, he goes in eastward, and he goes out eastward. He doesn't use the northern gate, and he doesn't use the southern gate. This gate is dedicated for use by him. In verse 9 it says, "But when the people of the land shall come before the Lord in the solemn feasts." Now this isn't just talking about worshiping on the Sabbath day or worshiping on the new moon, but this is the certain times of the year where they observe the feasts. It says, "He that entereth in by the way of the north gate to worship shall go out by the way of the south gate. And he that entereth by the way of the south gate shall go forth by the way of the north gate. He shall not return by the way of the gate whereby he came, but shall go forth over against it." Now, that seems like a strange rule to have, and you'd think, well, why in the world is this mentioned? Why is the direction in which the people are walking? Why do we have that information? What's the point? Well, specifically here it mentions the solemn feasts. Now, when the solemn feasts occur, remember in Zechariah chapter 14, it's not just the Jewish people who come to worship during the times of the solemn feasts. It's everybody that's supposed to come during the times of the solemn feasts. Now, if you have everybody coming in, trying to get their time in the temple complex, trying to worship the Lord and come before Him as they're supposed to during this time of the feast, you're going to get a traffic jam, a massive traffic jam. And so I think, personally, the way I see it is you've got two lines of people. You've got a line of people that's being funneled in from the north to the south, and you've got a line of people that's being funneled in from the south to the north. And whichever line you're in, you just keep moving. You don't stop. In order to make sure everyone is able to get through, you don't stop and turn around and go back the way you came. You keep moving in line the way you came so that there's a flow to it, just like traffic. You got your lane and you stay in your lane, and they've got their lane and they stay in theirs, and you just keep moving through. And the people moving from north to south would pass by the people moving from south to north, so that everybody has a chance to get in and out without getting ran over. I think that it's amazing to see that even something as trivial or a detail that is this minute has been thought of, and it's been calculated, and it's been projected into the future. And God already knows. We of course know that He knows, but He's shared even such small details with us that what His plan is to make sure that everybody has time to get in and out, to make sure that there's a system in place for this kind of thing. And so, if you have any questions about how well structured or how well God's kingdom is going to run and how efficient it's going to be in that time, He's even thought of this, and He's shared that information with us. So He's going to have a plan for whatever circumstance, whatever occurrence. If He gives us something to do, if He gives people a duty, and He says you need to fulfill this, He's going to have a way already planned out for it to happen. It's going to be expected that His will is going to be performed, but He's going to have systems in place. He's going to have the foundation laid for it to be built upon. It's not just everything's being built from scratch. Everybody's got to figure out everything from scratch. God's running this, so it's going to work. You imagine if people ran it, how big of a mess it would be. It says in verse 10, "And the prince in the midst of them, when they go in, shall go in, and when they go forth, shall go forth. And in the feasts and in the solemnities, the meat offering shall be an ephah to a bullock, and an ephah to a ram, and to the lambs as he is able to give, and an hin of oil to an ephah." And so there's specific measurements. There's supposed to be so much for every bullock. There's supposed to be so much for every ram. And then for the lambs, however, it says, and to the lambs as he is able to give. If he's got more than what he usually has, he gives more. If he's got less than what he usually has, he gives less. But the measurements of the meal and of the oil are to be fixed for the bullocks and the rams when those are offered. It says in verse 12, "Now when the prince shall prepare a voluntary burnt offering or peace offerings voluntarily unto the Lord." So these are not the required ritualistic offerings of the Sabbath day and of the new moon. These are voluntary. It says, "One shall then open him the gate that looketh toward the east, and he shall prepare his burnt offering and his peace offerings, as he did on the Sabbath day. Then he shall go forth, and after his going forth, one shall shut the gate." And so the gate does not remain open. It doesn't stay open until the evening like it does on the Sabbath day and the new moons whenever this voluntary offering occurs. It says in verse 13, "Thou shalt daily prepare a burnt offering unto the Lord of a lamb of the first year without blemish. Thou shalt prepare it every morning. And thou shalt prepare a meat offering for it every morning, and the sixth part of an ephah, and the third part of an hin of oil, to temper with the fine flour a meat offering continually by a perpetual ordinance unto the Lord. Thus shall they prepare the lamb and the meat offering and the oil every morning for a continual burnt offering." And so it's not just a weekly thing. It's not just a once a month kind of thing that these sacrifices and offerings are going to be presented. It will be a daily thing. The prince is going to get involved and make offerings on the Sabbath day and the day of the new moon, and then whenever he does a voluntary offering. But burnt offerings are going to be required daily, regularly, and it's going to be a full-time job for the priests and any helpers that they have. It is going to be full-time. So, and again, I think that the reason for that is, there isn't a day that we go that the offering, the sacrifice that Jesus made isn't good. There isn't a day that it isn't good enough. There isn't a day that it doesn't apply. It applies every day. And they're going to be doing this every day. They're going to be making these offerings, making these sacrifices, preparing them, butchering them, cooking them every single day without fail. Verse 16 says, "Thus saith the Lord God, if the prince give a gift unto any of his sons, the inheritance thereof shall be his sons. It shall be their possession by inheritance. But if he give a gift of his inheritance to one of his servants, then it shall be his to the year of liberty. After it shall return to the prince, but his inheritance shall be his sons for them." So what does that mean? So in the millennial kingdom, say that you have the prince, which I believe will be David, and he has his sons there in that time, and then he also has servants that serve under him, and he gives a gift. Well, if he gives a gift to one of his own offspring, it remains with them. It becomes their inheritance. But if he gives a gift to his servants, it says, it shall return to the prince. It shall be his to the year of liberty. After it shall return to the prince. So what is that? Well, I know Ron has talked a great deal about the year of Jubilee. And we'll read a little bit about that in the book of Leviticus here. Leviticus chapter 25, verses 8 through 13. Leviticus chapter 25, verses 8 through 13. It says, "And thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee, 7 times 7 years, and the space of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be unto thee 49 years. Then shalt thou cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, and the day of atonement shall ye make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. And ye shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." And so this 50th year, year of Jubilee, it's the year of liberty, as it was mentioned in Ezekiel. We'll keep reading here. It says, "It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. A jubilee that 50th year be unto you. Ye shall not sow, neither reap that which groweth of itself in it, nor gather the grapes of it in it of thy vine undressed. For it is the Jubilee. It shall be holy unto you. Ye shall eat the increase thereof out of the field. In the year of this Jubilee ye shall return every man unto his possession." And so the Jubilee is a time of wiping the slate clean. Any debts that had been issued are canceled. Any permanent servant relationships or slave type relationships at that time, bondservant, those, you're returned to your family. And of course, the property, any land, if you were from one tribe and you'd bought land or leased land or whatever agreement you made for it, and you'd made this agreement with somebody from another tribe, that land goes back to the person that originally belonged to. It goes back to that tribe. The inheritance of the tribes of Israel remains consistent, so that you don't have, a bunch of people from Ephraim completely taking over the Reubenite inheritance, and you don't have a bunch of people from Gad taking over the Simeonite inheritance. They have their individual inheritances, and this system is set in place to make sure that each tribe is able to perpetuate its own inheritance, and that they don't get lost in the mix, that they don't get overtaken, that they don't get shortchanged, that it's all fair. That's part of the reason for this Jubilee. Well, we see the year of liberty, the Jubilee, returning in the millennial kingdom. The Jewish people have not had a Jubilee in a very, 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 very long time. And they never really followed the Sabbaths and Jubilee requirements like they were supposed to from the very beginning anyway. But they have not had one in a very long time. In fact, the Jubilee is rendered pretty much useless whenever you don't have all the tribes in their land. So when Assyria took over the 10 northern tribes, there's really no more reason for a Jubilee, because then you've got 10 of the tribes that are out of, their inheritance has basically been taken away from them. It doesn't really belong to them. It belongs to somebody else now. At least under man's standards, it belongs to somebody else. And God allowed them to be judged in that way. And so they couldn't exercise the Jubilee when Nebuchadnezzar came in and took over the kingdom of Judah. Whenever they're in captivity, they can't do Jubilee. They were in captivity for 70 years. 50 years passed by in that 70-year time span. And for all we know, the year of Jubilee may have happened twice in that 70-year time span. We don't know. But God knows, and He's been keeping record of every 50 years, every Sabbath year, every 7th Sabbath year, every 50th year. He's been keeping record. He's been keeping track. He knows what's on schedule, and He knows when it's going to happen. He knows when it first needs to happen whenever He sets up the millennial kingdom. He's already been keeping track of all that. So, it's not like we have to worry about whether our records of history are good enough in order to be able to figure it all out. Like I said earlier, He's got it planned out. It's going to run because He's the one running it. So, but anyway, I do think it's interesting. So, whenever we see in Scripture it says the law is going to go forth out of the holy mountain, it's going to go forth. There's a whole lot of aspects to the Jewish law that are brought back and that will be practiced in the millennial kingdom. It says in verse 18, "Moreover, the prince shall not take of the people's inheritance by oppression to thrust them out of their possession, but he shall give his sons inheritance out of his own possession, that my people be not scattered every man from his possession." So the prince, assuming that it's David, he's a member of the tribe of Judah. So the only thing he's allowed to give to his sons is any of the lands and in the lands that belong to Judah. He can't just look over at one of his distant cousins and say, okay, well, you might be a Benjamite, but I'm going to take your land and I'm going to give it to my son. He can't do that. He doesn't have that authority. He doesn't have that right. It says in verse 19, "After he brought me through the entry, which was at the side of the gate, into the holy chambers of the priests, which looked toward the north, and behold, there was a place on the 2 sides westward. Then he said unto me, This is the place where the priests shall boil the trespass offering and the sin offering, where they shall bake the meat offering, that they bear them not out into the utter court, to sanctify the people." And so the idea here is that there's space set aside in the structure of the temple complex for the boiling and the preparation of the meat. The priests are not going to do all of the boiling and the cooking and the preparation out in the middle of the courtyard. It says that they bear them not out into the utter court to sanctify the people. And the same idea is that they have special clothing for whenever they enter into the holy place. And the prince is going to have special clothing, to go into the most holy. But what we see here is there is a division, there's a separation between the holy things and I don't want to say unholy things, but the less holy things. Because this is in and of itself a holy place with degrees or grades of things becoming more holy, more sanctified, more separate, as you proceed into the temple itself. Already this is a holier place because you have the walls, the very long walls that are 500 reeds square, And then there's the inner area, and within that inner area, you go further and further to the center, and then you get to the temple complex. And then you get into the outer court of the temple. And then you get into the inner court of the temple. And then you get into the temple itself, into the holy place. And then you become, there's the folding doors with the leaves that open up into the most holy place. And so it's just this, it's like layer after layer after layer that you keep peeling back, and it just, the closer you get into the center of it, that's the idea, is that it's holier. Now that doesn't mean it's better, what it means though is that God has sanctified it. He's made it separate. It's special. It's got a particular purpose. It's a little bit of a hard concept to explain with the way that the world is today, because when you want to separate something apart and you want to give something a specific purpose, the world today automatically jumps to segregation, discrimination, prejudice, racism, that there's some kind of bad motive for wanting to make anything separate. The idea of the world today is that everything must all be integrated all the time, and that it's evil to separate things, that everything must come together, because they've got this idea in their head that, well, if we all just come together and we all just work together, that well, maybe so, but what if we've got the wrong purpose when we all are just working together? We might be building the Tower of Babel, at that rate, doing the wrong thing, working for Satan's purpose instead of God's purpose. Now, when I say that, I'm not saying that, well, okay, you're from Ghana, you need to stay in Ghana, and you're from Japan, you need to stay in Japan, and you're from Mexico, you need to stay in Mexico. That's not what I mean. When I'm kind of disparaging their viewpoint. I'm not saying that everything, everywhere, ought to be segregated for a, ambiguous reason. But we set aside this church building to be a holy place. I mean, we don't come in here and just throw wild parties and all that stuff. It's a segregated place. It's separate from the things of the world. Now, the big difference with the millennial kingdom and the millennial temple and the temple at that time, or this church building, or any holy place, is that the degrees of holy are going to appear very different. Because for the most part, people living in the millennial kingdom are just going to be more moral than people that we have living today. I don't know how long that will last into the millennial kingdom. I don't know how long that moral purity is going to be preserved. We know by the end it's not going to be wholly preserved. But I don't know at which point in the 1,000 years that you really start to see the major, drop-off, where the line graph starts going down. I don't know when that's going to be, and nobody does other than God himself. I assume at some point that will happen somewhere. It's not going to be something that's out in the open, because remember, Jesus is the king. Jesus is ruling, and he's the one ruling with a rod of iron. And so it's going to be a strict kingdom. So when I say the holiness drops off and the moral purity drops off, I'm not talking about what's going on with people and the way they act outwardly toward others. I'm talking about the way they think. So, anyway, but at an outward appearance, it's really easy for us to say, well, this place is holy compared to out there, because we know what's out there. At any time, I hope not, but at any time, somebody could be, intoxicated and drive up and down this road right past our church building on Sunday. That can happen. So it's easy for us to know holy versus not holy. In the millennial kingdom, it's not that the people in the outer court are less moral or less worthy than the people in the inner court. It's not like the priests themselves are more worthy or more holy themselves than the regular Levites who are helping, or for your given Judeite or your given Simeonite or your given Benjamite. They just have a separate role. They've just been sanctified separately for this specific purpose. So it's a little bit different as far as the gradations and the way that you would view the concept of holiness. Hopefully that makes sense, that it's not that there's any more moral value whenever we're talking about something becoming more holy. It's literally, whenever we say more holy, all we mean is more separate. Because that's what essentially the word holiness is. It's sanctification, separation. Moving on into verse 21, it says, "Then he brought me forth into the utter court, and caused me to pass by the four corners of the court, and behold, in every corner of the court there was a court. In the four corners of the court there were courts joined to 40 cubits long and 30 broad. These four corners were of one measure." And so when you go in the Millennial Temple Complex, you go into the northwestern corner, northeastern, southwestern, southeastern. Each of those has their own specific court, and they're all the same size. It says, "And there was a row of building round about in them, round about them four, and it was made with boiling places under the rows round about. Then he said unto me, These are the places of them that boil, where the ministers of the house shall boil the sacrifice of the people." And so there's going to be, from verses 19 through 24, there is a special place. There's these places where the priests are going to have boiling. They're going to have their preparation. They're going to do all their prep work. And then they're going to have passages. They're going to have walkways from which they carry the prepared offering to the temple itself, so that it can undergo the ritual, and they can make the offerings, make the sacrifices. And they're not to just carry them out in the open, because this is a holy thing. It's a separate thing. It's a sanctified thing. And it's not meant to be done out in the open. It's not meant to be a common thing. It's meant to go through this process. Because making it separate is what makes it special. That's what gives it that's how it is able to fulfill its purpose, because it's a representation of something. And if you corrupt the representation, then you've missed the mark. You're not fulfilling the purpose that's intended to fulfill. And so that's why they have these rules and these laws in place, because there's a very specific purpose that they're trying to fulfill. So that is Ezekiel chapter 46. Does anybody have any comments or questions?